Now, any of you who know me and have been watching any of my videos know for a while that I like technology. I am certainly not the first person who's going to be lining up to decry all the bad things that smartphones have done to this generation. I don't believe in that crap.
You serious?
And, you know, phones are just hard to anonymize the same way the desktops are. So, yeah, I'll be interested to know if this is like mobile only stuff or if this also translates over to the desktop, where in theory, a user could have a little bit more privacy. Well, okay, so the headline says collection of voice data for profit raises privacy fears. This is not really news for a lot of our listeners, but it's one of those things that's worth knowing about. And this article specifically, because I actually don't see this talked about a lot personally. And this article is kind of one of those articles that might be really good to send to like friends and family. Because this is one of those articles who their basic premise is there's been a rise in voice assistants like Alexa and Siri. And because of that, there is now a whole secondary industry who is dedicated to taking those recordings and analyzing them for a variety of reasons. Like, for example, you might determine that a customer who's on hold is angry. And, you know, that might change who you route them to, for example, like maybe send them to a manager who has a little more authority, who can, you know, handle their situation better, or detecting if employees are disgruntled. The article actually points out that Amazon got in trouble for this recently. So this is kind of one of those articles that's a little bit all over the place. They're not really trying to make a point per se, so much as they are like exploring the whole issue. So it's definitely worth a read. And again, like, the fact that there are whole companies doing this is not something I see talked about a lot. So I think it's really cool for them shining a light in this area. Google is paying Indiana $20 million to resolve a privacy suit. Well, I guess it is controversial because we all know Google can pay more. So once again, this goes back to the allegation that Google continues to track users even when they disable the location history toggle on their Android phones. 40 states got together to mount a huge lawsuit back in November to the tune of $391.5 million. But apparently that stalled out. So Indiana just struck out solo and filed a separate lawsuit, which has already been settled. Boy, that was fast. Man, the government really moves when they want to. This is actually twice as much money as Indiana would have received had they stuck with the group suit. So I guess that's a win for them. And as usual, Google did not admit any wrongdoing as part of the settlement. I remember one of the stories that came out was that Facebook, if you were an Android user, Facebook had access to your actual SMS message content. Like if you had the app on your phone. And I remember telling one of my friends that I'm like, hey, did you hear about, like, trying to make the conversation about privacy? I'm like, did you hear about this Cambridge Analytica thing? And they're like, I've heard something about it. I don't really know much. And it's like, bro, come on. We'll move into our research section, and we're going to start with a really interesting one that made headlines. Ear spy attack eavesdrops on Android phones via motion sensors. I'm going to quote a little bit of the article here. A team of researchers has developed an eavesdropping attack for Android devices that can, to various degrees, recognize the caller's gender and identity and even discern private speech, unquote. So this was the result of a collaboration between researchers from 5 American universities. The attack basically works by using the other sensors in the device, like the gyroscope, for example, which is the one that allows you to, like, when you turn your phone sideways, it like rotates the video because now it knows it's sideways. It allows the other sensors in the device to pick up vibrations from the ear speaker and therefore eavesdrop on conversations. The article states that this technology has been explored in the past with the smartphone loudspeakers, so like the kind when you have this phone on speaker mode. But in the past, it wasn't really feasible because the ear speaker was too weak. It wasn't loud enough, and therefore they couldn't use it for that purpose. However, new phones have more powerful speakers, so now this is possible. The article goes really in depth with tables, numbers, really good breakdown of how they did this research and all that stuff. So as usual, feel free to check that out for full details. Really, the only mitigation they offer is to keep your volume on low. Like, don't blast your phone. And as an outsider, I can say that's true because I've definitely sat next to people where I can hear their whole conversation while the phone is against their ear, and it really annoys me. There are other fixes, but they're really outside the user's control. Like, they can change the way that the phone is constructed. So that way, like, where the internal components are placed could change how well the sound transfers through the components. They also mentioned that environmental vibrations will make it harder for this attack to work, obviously. So like if you're at a concert, it's harder for the internal components to realize what's good noise and what's not. Regardless of what OS you're on, it's worth noting that the researchers say that they used a third-party app to do this. So like with a lot of this stuff, it is really alarming, but as long as you're like keeping your device safe, keep control of it, be careful what apps you put on it, don't just put random crap on there, make sure you're getting it from the official source,
and you should be fine.
Google is not deleting users' abortion-related data despite post-Roe promise. So the title really says it all. After Roe v. Wade was repealed here in the U.S., which removed federal protections for abortions, regardless of how you feel about that, Google said that they would automatically delete any abortion-related data just to protect people's privacy. And this advocacy group called Accountable Tech ran a couple of experiments across several months. This was recent. I think their most recent one was in October. And they found that that was not true. Some of the things they did, they tried Googling abortion providers and other abortion-related things. They tried using Google Maps to drive to and enter clinics, so they had Google Maps running the whole time. And they tried scheduling abortions on their Google calendars just to see what Google was retaining. And then they went in and checked their accounts and looked in their history, and they found, quote, digital trails in their activity logs going back weeks, including the precise routes they took to get to the clinics. And again, all of this was despite the fact that Google said they would delete this data automatically. Google defended themselves by pointing out that users can disable this data collection in their accounts. They can manually delete the data, or they can set it to delete on a rolling basis. But yeah, just a reminder, if you're doing anything sensitive, you need to be really cautious about who you're using and be aware that they may be retaining logs, and that's not good. I was going to say, I think that's the real issue here, regardless of how you feel about abortion, is the fact that they said they were going to delete this thing, and now they're lulling people into a false sense of security. So, and that could go for anything. You know, if something, I don't know, I don't want to get on too much of a soapbox, but, you know, if you replace abortion, if you're anti-abortion, you replace that with something else that you're in favor of, and if Google said, like, if that thing got outlawed, and then Google was like, hey, we're going to automatically delete that data, and they didn't, you'd be pretty pissed, right? Like, yeah, it's lulling people into a false sense of security, I think, is the real danger there. That said, I think there's a lot of benefits to having an offline life in which to try and find someone to date. For example, start off by getting some hobbies. This isn't just privacy related or dating related. Everyone should have a variety of interests. This is good for you as a person and your mental health. It helps you grow and have an actual personality. Okay, so if you decide that you still want to do things online, or maybe both, maybe you're going to try meeting people in reality but also have some dating profiles, then you will have to start by picking a service. There's a lot of things that go into picking a service. On the obvious privacy side, I've talked about things like privacy policies and how to read them. There's also the fact of if they require an app. Apps typically require a lot more permissions and are harder to keep private as opposed to a browser website. That's not saying you can't use them, it's just something to keep in mind. It is about Grindr, whose data sharing problem is bigger than Grindr, according to the headline. I'm gonna quote the article. According to the journal's sources, one of the company's old ad partners, Mopub, was freely passing off location data from the tens of thousands of apps that use place-based information to monetize, and that included Grindr. So, I mean, that's kind of the gist of the whole story. Like, we covered an almost identical story last year about how Grindr was like sharing a lot of user data. This article is basically an update saying it was worse than what we thought it was. Like, there's more information now, we have a better picture, and it was actually worse than originally advertised. So that's kind of all it is, just an update to that story. Once you've picked a service, remember to start off with the basic good privacy services, which I have talked about in other videos, using a solid password, using an alias email address, and enabling two-factor authentication in the settings, which I will talk about a little bit more in a minute. While you're in the settings enabling two-factor, be sure to poke around and look for other settings. For example, you can turn off personalized ads, you can restrict who can see your profile, you can disable some of the telemetry or crash reporting, things like that. If you do decide to go with a premium service, remember to use privacy.com or a similar masking option in case of a data breach.
You serious?
So now let's talk about filling out your profile. If the service requires a username, I would just go ahead and randomly generate one. I've talked about this before. You can use the passphrase generator in your password manager, or if you use Bitwarden, they have an actual username generator. Just, make sure it's nothing too weird that might turn people away. If they require a real name, I recommend using a shortened version or a nickname. For example, if your name is Alexander, maybe use Alex, or go by your middle name instead of your first name. Nicknames are okay here as long as they are nicknames that you actually use. Once you begin using the service, remember that your messages are not private. They are visible to at least some employees, if not all of them, and they are visible to the person you are sending them to. You never know if they're going to screenshot them, print them out, post them on the internet. You don't know. There's whole subreddits dedicated to making fun of bad Tinder conversations. Your stuff might end up there. Now, just to round things out, let me talk about some basic safety tips when you're meeting up in person with someone for a first date. The two most common tips I've heard are to, number one, meet somewhere public. This could be, again, a bar, a library, a restaurant, whatever. And number two, tell someone close to you where you're going and when you expect to be back. Basically, give them all the information in case you went missing. Make sure you trust this person not to take advantage of that information. And if you're not back at the time you plan to be back, be sure to let them know that. For example, say like, hey, the date's supposed to end at 10, but if things are going really well and you think you want to go over for coffee, be sure to get in touch with your friend and be like, hey, I'm cool. We're going to go back to their place for coffee. Here's the address. I'll text you in the morning, whatever the case may be. If you're really, really worried about this, I know there are apps out there that allow you to temporarily share your location to a trusted person. I've never personally used those. They're probably not great for the privacy policy. If you think you need to use one of those, by all means, your safety is far more important than some stupid app privacy policy. Go ahead and use one of those. If you found this video helpful, please support us if you're able to. Again, we have a merch store where you can get things like coffee cups, t-shirts, and stickers. We also accept fiat currency donations, one-time and recurring. We also accept cryptocurrency donations. And of course, we have affiliate links where you can buy something to help protect your privacy, and we get a little bit in return. And of course, you can support us without spending a dime by sharing the video around, subscribing, and liking and leaving a comment. That really helps, especially on those algorithmic sites like YouTube, really helps people to discover us. If you think there's anything I missed, by all means, please leave it in the comments.